I'm really excited to be here today. This is my very first time I come to Canberra, and I'm really excited that it is for this occasion and to see the amazing work that's already being done in and around the Mill House. And I feel very privileged to be in some way part of that right now. I'm here representing Impact Investing Australia, and I would like to talk briefly about what we do as an organisation and the program that I manage. But especially, I want to bring that back to how I can see that apply and hopefully be of value for you, because I've just talked to a few people in the breaks and before the event, and I see that there is such an incredible body of knowledge in here, ready and eager to see how you can apply that to that social enterprise space. So Impact Investing Australia is a not-for-profit market building organisation, an independent organisation that aims to develop the structures and the infrastructure for accelerating impact investments in our market on all different levels, into small businesses in the form of social impact bonds, government participation, and for big institutional participation. And for me personally, I have worked, as Cindy already mentioned, on the more like ground level with social enterprises for the last couple of years in different places. And at some point I realized that if we don't get significant funding into those businesses, it will in some way always stay this small thing on the side, but it won't really be taken seriously. And this is how I came across impact investing in the first place and decided to dedicate my next steps of my career to that space. So, by way of background, in 2014, there was a task force established. Can I just, by show of hand, who is familiar with the concept of impact investing? Okay, half of it. So just to briefly frame that up to the ones of you who are not so familiar with it. Impact investing basically means that you do not just invest for financial returns, but you invest also intentionally for measurable societal outcomes alongside your financial returns. And so in 2014, there was a task force established under the leadership of the UK, a global task force that contained basically the G8 countries minus Russia plus Australia. And that task force had the job, or set it as their job, to accelerate impact investing globally together through a collaboration of those countries. And our current chair, Rosemary Addis, was invited to that task force as an individual representing Australia. And being part of the task force, one of the jobs was to set up a national advisory board of leaders in different industries across the financial and other industries that all in their own right would accelerate that industry in our country. Sorry. And this is how the Australian Advisory Board for Impact Investing was established in 2014. And the same year, they published the first report called Delivering an Impact. And it had 5 key strategic initiatives that would accelerate that market in our country. And one of them is the program that I'm representing today and that I have the honour of managing today, which is Impact Investment Ready. Australia's largest dedicated initiative that supports the investment readiness of impact-driven businesses. So what is Impact Investment Ready? At its core, Impact Investment Ready is a grants program that was seed funded by National Australia Bank of $1.75 million. And we provide grants up to $100,000 to mission-driven organisations that are on their journey to investment readiness. And there are certain gaps in the ecosystem that we're closing with that initiative. The first gap is a funding gap for businesses. So we have seen that there are businesses out there that have sustainable business models that could potentially step in front of investors and take on finance, but often there is something missing. They don't have the strong financial models. They don't know how to prepare the legal documents or the information memorandum, or they may need some accounting support. But those businesses usually don't have the funding to really engage the high quality support. So that is really what our funding is for. We provide the grant so that the businesses can contract high quality service providers to get them to investment readiness. The second gap that is closing at the same time is a gap in the capacity building market, because right now there's lots of organizations, and hopefully lots of you amongst them out there, that would love to work with those businesses, but if the businesses aren't able to pay for the services, it's not really worthwhile for the service providers themselves to really engage with them. At least it's not sustainable. And the third gap we're closing with an initiative is a gap in the deals, in investable deals for investors. Because we know by fact that in Australia there's a lot of capital out there, a lot of investors that would love to put more money into businesses with an impact lens. But right now, there are not enough businesses out there that really have the capacity to take on significant finance. And that is what we are looking at. So we are really focusing, we are agnostic to whether the organization is for-profit or not-for-profit. We don't have a definition of a social enterprise. I actually don't use that word all too often anymore. We talk about mission-driven organizations, impact businesses. What we look for is that there is an organization that really has at the core of what it's doing a social or environmental mission, that they manage for that, and that they aim to solve that issue in a financially sustainable way. That is really what we look at. And that can be in any of those impact areas that you see there. We are really agnostic to that. At the stage that they come to us, we are looking for the organization have established a business model, so they're post-trial stage, because we really want that they're actually ready to take on investment within the next 6 to 12 months. Over the last 2.5 years, we have given 23 grants to organizations, about half of which have already raised $43 million in investment in total. And I'm not saying that to brag about our numbers, but I'm saying that because I believe that there have been a couple of learnings in that journey for us. We have seen lots of applications. We have had lots and lots and lots of conversations with organizations that think or want to go on the journey towards investment readiness. And I think that is just a bit of what I would share, what I would like to share with you today, the insights that we're having from what works there and what doesn't. But here are just a couple of examples, because Cindy has just said it. We can talk about impact businesses and social enterprise, etc., so much, but for many people, and I believe still for a couple of you in the room, it is still at a very early stage of you engaging with that topic. And so actually having the businesses and being able to talk about what they're doing is so invaluable, and telling those stories. We have here just a couple of the organizations that have engaged with our program. The first ones are the grantees that we've actually supported towards investment readiness. The second ones are a couple of the intermediaries, the capacity builders, that have supported them on the way to investment readiness and have actively worked with them. And the third column are the funders, the different organizations, trusts, foundations, institutional investors like National Australia Bank, private investors like Pangea Impact Investments that have actually deployed capital in those businesses. And for instance, Higher Up. Higher Up is an incredible business that really shows how you can do good, make money in a sustainable way at the same time. So I believe you're all aware of the changes with the NDIS. And Higher Up is a platform that directly connects carers with the people seeking care, matches them based on their interests, gives complete empowerment and flexibility back to the people with the disability that actually are looking for care. So I can say, if I'm a person with a disability and Cindy's a carer, I can say we have the same interests in the same books, and we both love bird watching, and I want Cindy to come to my house on Saturday and Sunday between 5 and 7 p.m. And if I don't want that anymore, I can stop that. And it's just amazing how much flexibility and empowerment it gives back to the people with a disability. And the business model simply is that Higher Up takes a small clip of every single transaction that is made through the platform. That is just one example, and I could go on to talk for hours about all their amazing models, and I'm happy to do that in the break. Something I do want to mention is that over the last, we've just done our first report where we've really looked at how have we supported the businesses and the capacity builders through our program. And a part of that was reflecting on the different states where they came from. And so in fact, I'm not sure if whether you can see it on that slide there, but of our grantees, both of our grantees and the providers, so far providers are the capacity builders, that's what we call them. So far, none of them has come from the ACT. And it is something that we have reflected on, and you see a couple of other states. So there also haven't been any from the Northern Territory, for instance. And it's something we've reflected on quite a bit over the last couple of months. And so there were thoughts around, discussions around, should we have specific grant rounds that target those states to really encourage that? However, what I believe if we look at that as a business journey, I've put their social enterprise journey, can be any business journey, and the stages have different names, but they're all, in the end, comes all to a certain journey from an ideation stage to then validation, and then you have your first customers, and at some point you grow your business. Where the Impact Investment Ready Growth Grant basically kicks in right now is at the stage where there is a validated model, there's a potential for growth and to take on investment. What needs to happen before our initiative, where it's placed in the market, can actually be effective is all that work that has to happen before. It's the amazing work that's happening here, the ideation stage, who actually helps the businesses to build those models that are then later potentially scalable or that are at least financially sustainable in the first place, who helps them to find their customers, who figures out with them whether their model actually really has an impact. All of that has to happen before our program, for instance, can actually come in and really then support them towards investment readiness. And this is why I'm excited to be here today and to see you all here today, because I see in you the people who will make that happen. I'm currently part of a leadership program that is quite intense and challenging, and sometimes had me want to leave it. And I recently talked to one of the managers of that program after another one of these phases, and she says, and I had a conversation with her about how many people I talked to that finally got me back into it and present to that I really want to do this actually for myself. And she said, it takes a village to get someone through this program. It really does. And it made me reflect on how much that applies to the growth journeys of impact businesses as well. It does take a village. Like, no one does it by themselves. Cindy has said it before. We've seen it before here. There are so many touch points and so many organizations and people, mentors, etc., that really are required to get a business to a stage where it can sustainably grow and have the maximum impact it can have. And so what I want to share with you are just a couple of learnings when it comes to the intermediary space, what really works or what we've seen over the last 2.5 years. And something to mention here maybe is that for Impact Investment Ready, every single business that applies for our grants program and applies for the funding, they have to apply together with the advisor, with the capacity builder. And why that is because we know how incredibly important the skills of the capacity builder are actually for the success of the business in the end. And this is why we really pay close attention to what the relationship is like, what the skills of the provider are like, etc. And that's why I think we can say a little bit about what works in that space. So that is one that I always like to go back to. Simon Sinek, start with your why. I would encourage each and every one of you who is currently thinking of whether you want to get into this, whether this is something you want to be part of, to really ask yourself why you want to do that. And I hope with all the incredible stories that we've heard today, all of you are fired up and can't wait to jump into this ecosystem and find your place. But I really think that the most successful providers and advisors that we have seen out there have a really deep connection to why they do the work that they do. And there are others out there that just want to dip their toe into the water, and they may do like 95% of like purely commercial services for business, and that is great, and start there. But really always go back to why you want to support those businesses. And yeah, as I said, I think we've seen enough stories already today that really make a great point for that. This is Jordan O'Reilly, the founder of Higher Up, that business I've just talked before. He raised $2.2 million for that business about maybe 2 years ago. Worked together with an organization called Impact Generation Partners, which is basically a couple, Amanda and Quentin Miller. And he said, for me, that there are two clearly distinct sides of the coin. The first was before we met Impact Generation Partners, and the second is after we met them. And he really talks very vividly about what his life was like at the moment when he didn't know that such a thing as a social enterprise existed, just as we've heard it here, and just thought that it is a totally crazy thing he was doing, because that is the feedback he got from the entire ecosystem, from all advisors, traditional startup, mentors, etc. They were all like, what are you actually doing there? And fortunately today that is a lot more accepted, and there is a lot more knowledge and appreciation of that kind of business in our markets. But for him, really having great advisors that really got both the commercial side and the impact side and had the connections to the right investors has made a whole lot of a difference. And I would say that the amazing impact that HireUp has today would never have happened at that scale without those advisors. So it is critical, and you do play an incredibly important role. Same but different. In the end, if we talk about impact-driven businesses, which I like to call them, they are businesses. And there are a couple of things that are very similar to a traditional business. You have to have a sustainable financial model. You need to validate that there's actually customers out there that want that. You need to be able to validate that someone will actually pay for that. And your product, and I think that is a very important part, your product or service has to be just as good as the product or service of any non-impact-driven business or non-mission-driven organization. Because in the end, something that we really see is your customers may come for the first time because you have this nice social impact, but in the end, if the business doesn't deliver the product or service that is just has just as a high quality as a traditional business, or even lower quality, then the customers will not keep coming. So there has to be a real rigor around that. So in many ways, an impact-driven business is just a business. And in other ways, they're different. They're different. The founders often have different motivations. We've just seen it here. There's often a really deep connection to the purpose and to the why behind the business. There are different legal structures. Do you establish it as a not-for-profit organization, as a for-profit organization, and why? What are the different funding options that flow from that? So I really encourage you to get familiar and see where you see yourself in that space, and really learn and inquire into those differences. And one of those differences is the impact side of things. Because we're not just dealing with establishing a business that is commercially successful, but of course there's the entire side of a really complex social issue that wants to be solved. And I always remember, who has heard of the social enterprise called Street, the cafe? Yes. One of the biggest, I guess, success stories in social enterprise. So Street has built cafes that employ and train young people that are at risk of dropping out of society. They're basically either they dropped out of school or they have drug problems or any kind of other addictions, etc. Those are basically the people that they employ and train. And Beck Scott is one of the most incredible humans you could ever meet, so make sure you meet her if you're ever in Melbourne. But what really impressed me, one time I heard her speak actually at the Social Traders Conference last year, was that she said, people always talk to us about scale and how we can build more and scale operations. But people sometimes don't quite understand that the social issue sometimes has a different pace than what you can do commercially. And sometimes I can count that I've sold 100 more coffees today, but maybe the biggest success that day was that this one 14-year-old boy smiled for the first time in the last 6 months. And that is something that has to be considered. And I think it's incredibly exciting. It is incredibly exciting. It's very complex. It's sometimes difficult and tricky, but I also think it's the most rewarding thing about those businesses. And impact, thank you for the question around impact measurement, and I would love to have conversations about that in the break or over lunch with anyone who is actually interested in that, because I have my own opinion about that, and I think coming from a perspective where we look at the investor side, if you look at that quote from one of our investors into one of our grantees, we do see that as soon as you want to get funding into those businesses, impact measurement is critical. It is important. I have businesses coming to us that say, we have an impact because we are in the education business. I don't know. You could potentially do harm to children. How do I know what your programs are like? How do I know whether that is any better than what any other education business out there does? How do I know whether you're just in it for commercial reasons, for instance? I don't, and the impact measurement side is incredibly critical. And it doesn't always, especially when you start off, it doesn't have to be incredibly complex. And what we look at, for instance, when we award grants, impact measurement is one of the really important parts that we look at. And we don't ask whether the organization has completely figured it out, because they don't. And usually they don't for quite a while. And maybe it's going to take quite a lot longer. What we do look at is, how does the organization think about impact? Are you clear on your theory of change and on your logic model? Are you clear on why you really think that what you're doing here is going to deliver that outcome here, even if it's just in 3 years? Is there any kind of research that suggests that that's actually happening? And so that is really what we look at. And I think like getting that rigor in from a very early stage is really important. Because I've worked for half a year with the Difference Incubator, which is an amazing incubator based in Melbourne as well. And if there's one thing I've taken away from those 6 months, it is one quote that the founder repeated over and over again. And that is, you get what you design for. And that applies to your business model, that applies to your impact model. So think about all those things from a very early stage, because you get what you design for. The next point is find your spot. As an intermediary in that space, where do you see your role? Because we really need support, as you said before, across all those different stages. Is it the ideation stage? Is it to help really develop the strategy and the business model? Is your thing investment and growth? Is it the legal structuring of companies? And so I really believe we need more. I sometimes have people approaching me saying we would like to become a provider to those businesses. We help businesses grow. It's like, yeah, but what do you actually do? Like, what's the expertise you bring to that? And I guess we can, I'm going to come back to that in the next points. And another point is build trusting and long-term relationships. I've talked to a lot of investors, and often what investors say to me is, we want those businesses to come to us early at the stage where they know they don't get money from us anyways. But we know what they're up to, and they get feedback from us, and they start building trust. And the same applies to intermediaries. We see that most of the connections with the businesses and the intermediaries, it doesn't happen because like, oh, I quickly need someone. Well, actually that happens quite often. Business, 2 days before grant application deadline, picks up the phone. We need an intermediary for this application. Can you help us? They go, look, we don't have enough time for that. We need to know your business. No, I don't want you to do anything. I just need your name on there. Never works that way, right? And we really see that the most high quality applications, and in the end the most successful investment cases, are built on trusting long-term relationships. And I really do believe that because the impact side of it is so dear to the founders, and there's those core, really like deep core values embedded in the organization, it is even more important, because you need to align on that end just as much as you need to align on the actual business skills side. And that is a point, cultivate a spirit of collective support, that I find really impressive to see it in action, how it's actually happening in our ecosystems across Melbourne, Sydney. You know, like in normal traditional professional services, you have competition and you know something about something and you keep it to yourself, and that's how you make it. That's not how you make it in that space. What happens in our space is that an organization goes to intermediary and says, can you support me in this? And the intermediary thinks, it's actually not exactly what I can do, but I refer to this person. And then they refer you further. And there's really this incredible spirit of, let's just all together make it work for that organization. And let's just figure out, and this is what comes back to like find your spot, let's figure out who is the best person we can bring into this to make sure that in the end the organization succeeds. And I think that is really the best thing you can do. And we see that lots of intermediaries that are just like 1 or 2 people organizations, they have associates that they bring in whenever they need them. It's a bit of like patchwork to make sure that they can actually provide comprehensive services for the business and whatever they need at any stage, without being in any way, wanting to have ownership of that. want you to leave you with a quote from Amanda Miller, who is one of the two pieces of Impact Generation partners, who says, I think we need more advisory support to come into the space to help on the investment side, as well as the actual development of the business, and continued collaboration. One of the reasons why we have enjoyed coming into this space from the corporate world is that it's a collaborative space where people are driven not only by the dollars, but by solving the issues that the world is facing. We are all keen to work together to make it happen, and I believe that the collaborative nature is what will make it happen. And that's my hope for the ecosystem in Canberra. And I can tell you that you're obviously, of course, not alone here, because there is quite developed ecosystems in Melbourne and Sydney, and those people will be just as open to work with you and support you on that journey wherever they can. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.